Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webcast, Spotting the Threat, Knowing What Employee Actions to Look For. I'm Nick Cavalancia with Tech Evangelism. I'm really excited about today's webcast. It's going to be very informative. You know, when you think about an insider threat and trying to figure out what an employee is doing, whether it's good or bad, it's really kind of tough. We're going to talk about this a little bit today about just how tough it is and why it is so tough. And the question kind of becomes, you know, well, what should I be even looking for in the first place in order to figure out if they're thinking about doing something wrong, if they're actually doing something wrong, if they already have done something wrong? And you know, that's really the question. And so in today's webcast, I'm joined by Jim Henderson. He's with Insider Threat Defense. He's CEO there. He's also founder and chairman of the National Insider Threat Special Interest Group. He's got 15 years of experience protecting classified information up to, and I'm reading this off of his bios. This is really good. The top secret SC, I hope that's an SCI level. Is that right, Jim, or is it SC1 level? Which one did I read right? Is it SCI?
SCI.
SCI. I don't even know what that means, so I'm already impressed. I mean that sincerely. And Jim's been involved in the development, the implementation, management of insider threat programs, as well as information assurance programs for a number of U.S. government agencies, defense contractors, state governments, and so on and so forth. He's also developed and teaches an insider threat program. It's a course that he does. He taught over to 500 organizations, and he also provides consulting services in the area of insider threat program development and management. So, Jim, that's a mouthful, but I think it was kind of important for the audience to know just exactly how awesome a speaker we have today. So welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're gonna have a good time today. So for you guys in the audience, it's gonna be a little bit of a different kind of format for the webcast. Rather than it just being death by PowerPoint and tons of slides and listening to, let's say, me drivel on for half an hour and then Jim comes and talks at the end, we're doing this in more of a conversational format. I think it's just 4, maybe 5 slides tops. They're very light on content. I've got some questions for Jim already that I've been kind of thinking about that I really wanted to ask. And we're going to kind of walk through this topic of trying to figure out how to spot a threat, try to even define what a threat is and so on, what you should be doing, what kind of solutions you should use. And we're going to do this in more of a back and forth kind of conversational nature. So I've got the Q&A box up here, up and open the entire time. If you have questions at any point in time during the webcast, ask them. If you got a comment, a joke, a funny anecdote, I mean, anything that you want to do to participate in the webcast, stick that into the Q&A box. If I can incorporate that in, I will happily do so. And at the same time, if there's any questions or comments that we didn't get to, we'll certainly do those at the end like a traditional webcast. And so be certain to involve yourself as much as you want, get as much information as you can out of both Jim and myself, and we'll be happy to do that with you today. Remember that today's webcast is brought to you by Veriato. We're going to do a very brief little promotional thing, one slide at the end about Veriato solutions, but there's no demo on this one, no pitch. This is really just about you guys getting educated, so take as much advantage of it as you can. So the first place I want to start is just this concept of the insider and them being so elusive. And because they're elusive, it's of course very difficult to tell whether someone is doing something for good or for bad, and we'll talk more about that in today's webcast. There's a couple of stats that I pulled out of some very recent reports in 2018, so very relevant data to today. The first one is the fact that 28% of data breaches are committed by an insider, and that comes from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, which I've got a little link down there, and you can go ahead and take a look at that. If you're not reading the Data Breach Investigations Report every year, it comes out around March, April every year, you need to be reading it. It's a great report. Now, this 28% number, you go, Nick, that's really small. That's like almost a quarter of them. That's it. Well, in contrast, the other, it's 72% that are committed by an external actor of some kind. They're using such a massive amount of automated tools to where it's just opportunistic. It's like basically playing the numbers game. Let me go out and send 1 million emails or a few million emails. I will get into several thousand organizations. I will eventually get to 100 different elevated sets of credentials, and then maybe 10 of those companies I get data out of. You know, it's so opportunistic and so automated that those numbers have to be so much larger because they're not even really trying themselves. They're just doing it with, here, to hit all these IP addresses and go. The 28% here, I find that to be a massive number because it represents someone who individually, manually is going through the process of trying to do something to benefit themselves and not the organization. So I really find, when you think about that perspective where it's 20% of all the breaches are somebody doing it on their own versus a bunch of people in some Eastern Bloc country that is using a bunch of automated tools to do all the work for them, that's a big number. The other thing that I found out here is when asked about organizations what they're concerned about, which the insiders they're concerned about, a little over half are concerned about regular employees, and this comes, actually, I've got the link in a moment here. A little more than half are worried about privileged users and IT admins, and you see 42% here are worried about sort of the other people that have some level of high-level access, like you see contractors and service providers and so on in the organization. And this comes from the Insider Threat Report that comes out every year from the Information Security Group on LinkedIn. So this insider that you're trying to find out, they're committing a number of breaches. In the case of data breaches, there's also fraud. There's a number of other things we'll talk about today. And if you look at the who we're worried about, it's pretty much everybody. So, so I'd like to do, Jim, is maybe where you and I can start our conversation is talking about why identifying threats are tough. For you guys in the audience, the answer is relatively simple, and I put it up here this way. They're on the inside. I know that seems sort of like I'm sort of stating the obvious, and what I mean is they're people that are already doing a job. If someone's job is to be in accounting, let's say accounts payable, and they're supposed to issue checks, well, if they're going to commit some kind of dastardly deed, they're probably going to write a check, and they already write checks. So it's really tough to figure out, is that to use, going back to, what is it, Wizard of Oz, where Glinda the witch said, are you a good witch or a bad witch? Is it a good check or a bad check? I don't know. And it's a simple enough answer, but in reality, it's far more complex than that. The idea is the insider can occur anywhere inside of your organization. It isn't necessarily just someone who is in IT or just someone who is the C-level. It can literally be anybody that has access to any kind of critical information or an application, some kind of financial data. I mean, anything like that. It can exist anywhere. The other thing with insider risk is it tends to shift, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why insiders become threats in today's webcast. But it can shift based on a number of factors, which I think I'm actually going to save that. And you guys stick that one in your pocket. We'll talk about why it shifts in a little bit. They appear to be doing their job. Again, is it a good check or a bad check? And then there's lots of different types of activity that would be considered insider activity. There's lots of different things. We're going to give you some real tactical examples of what to be looking for in today's webcast, and you'll kind of get a sense of that as well. And there's lots of different kinds of valuable data to an organization that could be valuable to an insider they'd want to use maybe in their next job, or they're going to sell it on the black market, or again, they're going to issue themselves a check, or whatever the case is. So, Jim, I've done enough talking, so I really want to get you in on the conversation here. And let me actually back up a little bit. I laid out sort of why it's difficult to kind of, identify an insider threat. But I know you see this, because we talked a little bit before on a previous call. You probably see this a little more an issue around what an organization sees as a threat in the first place. Would you explain that a little bit to the audience?
Yes, it's, there's the traditional definition of insider threat that may say terrorism, workplace violence, stealing data. Then I go with the expanded definition of what is of concern to your organization. Is it, the disgruntled employees? Is it, your traditional, of course, in the governance space, it would be espionage. Is it IT sabotage? Somebody's going to sabotage your network. Is it fraud, theft? What is a company concerned about? Are they only going to say, we're only concerned about protecting sensitive data, and if they have classified data, or are we going to go beyond that? Are we going to look at disgruntled employees who may be on the edge of becoming insiders? Are we going to also look at workplace violence and bullying? So I always say that there's an expanded definition of traditional definitions, if that makes sense, Nick.
It certainly does, and I think that's a really good point to make. So you guys in the audience, traditionally we always sort of focus on security, and you mentioned like workplace violence and bullying, and even just a disgruntled employee who could do something else. Maybe it's not about security. Maybe they might manipulate data. They might destroy data. I mean, there's all kinds of other things they could be doing. So I like that. That is a really good place to start for you guys in the audience, thinking about what is it that is the threat, if you will, to the organization you're worried about, and that's actually going to dictate in a lot of ways what you're going to need to be looking for in the long run. To your point, Jim, in fact, like the workplace violence or the bullying or something, that's probably a lot of communication. Versus if you're worried about someone stealing data, well, we're really worried about access to data and what they do with it, and so it's very different. So I love that. Let's talk about the
Nick,
shifting. Go ahead, please, Jim.
I was just going to add, I'm looking at the 4 leading definitions, and you've got Carnegie Mellon has a definition, and you got the National Insider Threat Policy and the DoD. I'm just looking through them real quick, and they pretty much say espionage, terrorism through unauthorized disclosure. Nothing's really in there about the workplace violence or any of that. So I guess I urge companies sometimes not to get hung up on definitions. I see things in training through the NITSIG that aren't even definitions, that serious things happen in companies and people die just because they've never thought outside the scope of the definition, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah, it does, definitely. Let's talk a little bit about this notion I brought up about insider risk shifting, because I think it's really important that people aren't just focusing on a specific individual or a specific role in the organization, although those are important, that they at least understand that the risk shifts. I mean, do you agree risk shifts in the organization?
No, that's a very good point. Yes, can they shift? Well, think about it. Think about it from a high level, like company perspective. If there's a reduction in force, maybe you had a pretty happy company. Well, now the rumor's going around that there's going to be, let's say, 30 or 40 people being laid off, but nobody knows. So you might instantly go from happy people to disgruntled people. Let's say a rumor's going around about a bad year for the company, so the rumors are going around, whether it's true or not true. Well, people are thinking no raises, no bonuses, or there's just some rumor or something circulating around the company. People might just decide to leave. And what do people do sometimes when they leave? They take data with them. So yes, I believe that risk can shift. An individual risk can shift. He could be a happy employee, something happens, and boom, he goes down that path. So yes, I think they can vary depending on the culture of the company and the culture of the company.
Yeah, I see it as being just everyday things in the office can make people upset. Like your examples were great. I'm thinking of just things like getting passed up for a promotion. Again, you mentioned things like maybe expecting a bonus of some kind and you don't get it. I mean, all those things about expectation versus reality kinds of things, and those can cause people. And I think that there's a couple of industry. There was a couple. Veriato did one a couple years ago. I know Semantic did one, and there was a new one that came out. Maybe it was an Osterman research report. I don't remember, but they all had, when people leave the organization, it was something like 57%, give or take a couple percentage points to make sure that I'm covering myself in case the number's not exact. But something like 57%. It was over half of employees thought it's absolutely fine. They're just going to take some information with them when they leave. So yeah, you're thinking about people leaving is one thing. Sometimes people just think they're due. I remember a story that was back, I'm going to call it 2014, something like that. It was the security officer for is it Softbees, I think it was, and she decided to start stealing from the organization. She just felt she was due. I mean, that's literally what she said. She's like, I've been here for this many years. I'm owed this. And she, taking things. They're just, huh? What?
Well, yes, Nick, they've built the place. They feel that I've built this organization and now I'm not getting back in return what I expect. So guess what? I'm taking what I'm not supposed to with me because it's going to benefit me in my new job, and I'm going to look like Superwoman or Superman. I mean, it's almost sometimes that simple. They shouldn't do it, but they do.
Agreed. So let's do this. Let's talk a little bit about defining where the risk of the threat is by focusing maybe on the data that's valuable. Because I think a lot of organizations are trying to figure this out. And there's the human factor, but then there's also the data factor. Do you think it's as simple as sort of find out who has access to, say, like the sales data, and that's where they should be doing? Or is there more than that they should be doing when they're trying to figure out where the risk and the threats could exist?
Well, this is another one I feel that can be somewhat complicated. Traditionally, you hear a lot of people saying, well, you have to do it. First, you need to know who's accessing your data, right, and why. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Another concept would be, okay, we need to do a data inventory of our most critical access and then see who's accessing it. Well, why is Nick accessing it? He doesn't work in that department. Okay, Jim does. So that's the company saying, these are my 5 or 8 most critical assets. But then if we look at it another way, what does the employee who is disgruntled, decides to steal, he may be looking at data that may not be defined in that top 8 or 10 critical. It's what he has access to and what he can take to benefit his objective. So sometimes I see that as a problem is, yes, the company is going to evaluate what their most critical assets are, and the employee may know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's he going to do? He's going to go for the low-hanging fruit. It still may be beneficial in his new job or whatever his objective is for stealing the data or doing his malicious action.
It's a good point. There was a story a couple of years back. It was actually a Veriato story, and there was a celebrity at a hospital, and the celebrity was checked in. Everything was done very confidential. They didn't want to be known that they were in for whatever. The joke I like to tell is like if Snoop Dogg was, he was put into a hospital for glaucoma, of course, they're one of those things, and they don't want anyone to know it was whoever the celebrity was. And because they had Veriato installed, they're finding out who did it. And it's something as simple as that, where it's a very small sort of threat action, but they may have taken that data for the purpose of maybe selling it to a news channel. Hey, give me $200, I'll tell you, there's a celebrity here, and I'll tell you who they are and where they're at, or whatever. And no one would ever think that that's what you should be protecting. But
Nick, I saw one that was similar to that. It was a young woman, I think, that was working in a plastic surgeon's office in California and had access to all the people that got plastic surgery done. And for whatever reason, she decided to take all that information. That's supposed to be confidential.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly there's HIPAA issues and things like that, but that certainly probably wasn't trying to be protected from the standpoint of the company thinking, well, I don't want that getting out into the press. They were thinking about it being something like, let's protect the data that's worth money, like a health record being worth whatever it is these days, $100 or something. And instead, this is just about, I want to make a quick buck with a news channel or a tabloid or something. In your case, probably. So let's do this. Let's go on to the next slide and talk about some of the actions that indicate a threat. And for you guys in the audience, I see there being sort of, I'm going to categorize as sort of 2 different types of indicators. This isn't probably exactly the way that Jim does it in his training, but I'm just trying to do this to try to make it kind of easy to digest for you guys if you're new to trying to figure this all out. And I think about, first off, leading indicators. And what I mean by a leading indicator is something that would tell you that this person is either going to become a threat, or in some cases they already are a threat because the indicator didn't show up until they've already done something bad. And that's one of the challenges here. But there are instances where there are leading indicators that someone is going to do something potentially wrong or has the opportunity to do something wrong, sort of statistically speaking. Jim gave a really good example of people leaving the organization, and I threw that sort of somewhat made up but actually factually based stat of 57% of people steal information when they leave the company. Well, statistically speaking, that if someone's going to leave, then they might, or they probably, one of those two, somewhere in that range, they're going to steal data. So if you can figure out that they might be leaving, good leading indicator. They haven't done anything bad yet. See what I mean? And that's where you want to kind of go. So some of those indicators are very simple at a high level, and we're going to get tactical on another slide here, so don't worry about that. We're going to get very down to what you should be looking for. But at a high level, shifts in behavior, that's the first thing. Are they doing something different than they used to? And just a simple example, like they're coming in at different hours than they used to. Or maybe just a shift in behavior, they're not getting their work done, and now HR is suddenly telling you that they're having performance issues with that person. I mean, it could be something as simple as that, where they're not even doing anything wrong yet, they're just sort of acting differently. Shifts in communication is another one. It's been proven. In fact, the FBI came out. It's probably 10 years ago, somewhere around 2006, I want to say, maybe a little later than that, where they came out with a list of words that if you search for these words, these key phrases in email, you were had a high potential of detecting fraud. And it'd be the same words you'd find today with stuff like cooking the books or, second set of books. So, all kinds of different phrases that they had. And those kinds of communication can help dictate that if those are suddenly being used. But also shifts in communication like tone, things like maybe they're generally positive towards the company and now they're suddenly negative towards the company, or they're getting negative. I don't like this place anymore. They were supposed to give me a raise and blah, 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 whatever, and it didn't happen. And the tone is very negative. And then also even just changes in, it used to be lots of we's and us's, like we're going to be going to X show next August and we're going to be demonstrating our whatever product. You hear we's and ours in my statement there. And suddenly it shifts to I's and me's. I can't believe that I didn't get that job. That job was owed to me. I've been here a long time. See, that's all I's and me's. It's very different. Those are leading indicators, and they're ways of spotting something before it happens. And then there's what I'm calling active indicators. These are not formal terms, just terms I'm trying to one's leading before it happens. Active indicators, things happening right now where they're doing. And the general idea is you're looking for anything that's unusual. So out of the norm, that example of someone coming into work early, that's unusual. Why are they suddenly coming into work early and leaving late every day? That kind of thing. Or something that's truly inappropriate. They're printing out 50 pages when they normally print 2. Something like that. Again, that falls in unusual as well, but it might be inappropriate. Like for their job, they never need to print out 50 pages of anything. They work in sales inside Salesforce. They don't print ever. We don't print papers. We send stuff via electronic documents and PDFs. We never have to print anything. So it'd be inappropriate, so to speak, for their job. And then the other thing is sort of consider here that not all threats are necessarily malicious. And we'll talk a little bit about that. In fact, I think let's actually start with that, Jim. I think most organizations are probably thinking around the insider is, somebody who's sort of hell-bent on hurting the organization and stealing data or something like that. But that's not always the case. They're not always malicious, right?
Right. And this, very good point, Nick, because this is one of the key things that I stress in the beginning of my training is that about keeping your house in order. That if you're going to put in an insider threat program over top of houses that's not in order, you're going to have all these people doing things that they shouldn't. Maybe they're not necessarily malicious in nature, but what do they call it? Like white noise. You've got all these problems going on, people doing stuff they shouldn't. They're not necessarily stealing, but they're doing things that are practices dangerous to security. Maybe they're uploading to the cloud to get the job done. So what I see is that first you need to keep your house in order, make sure people are following their security policies, you have a good culture of security. Then you put the program in place, and the program catches the stuff that people may be, doing maliciously or still doing that they shouldn't be doing. But I guess I'm going back to having a good culture. So violations of security policy, just ignoring policies to get the work done. Well, I know I'm not supposed to copy it to a USB stick or I'll have to upload it to the cloud. These are practices that are, dangerous to security. Oh, I need to work on this, but I'm just going to take the document home. And it's just taken home in a folder, and maybe it contains sensitive information. I've seen a lot of those where data's gotten lost simply on that. It wasn't, at least, let's say, put on a USB or CD that was encrypted. It was just there for the taking, and somebody lost it. And then it comes to find out they were never supposed to take it out of the company. So email phishing is another one. I mean, a lot of the way the cyber criminals are getting through is through email phishing. And, quite honestly, how many companies are doing email phishing testing to see their susceptibility? So those are just some of the examples, of non-malicious, I would call it.
Yeah, I would agree. The Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, they have a breakout for just the healthcare industry. I don't know if any of you guys in the audience are in healthcare, but if you are or you aren't, it doesn't matter. But I just want to kind of point out, you mentioned the thing about just taking something home to do the work. It's very it's very just, sort of naive, or, it's just very positive in nature. Just want to get some work done from home, no big deal. But I want to say it was more than half of the data breaches in healthcare were like due to,
Yes, Nick, it was
like,
58% actually out of the
yeah,
1,300 and let's say 27 or 50, 58% of those,
yeah,
over half were insider threats. And I caution people sometimes to, even though those statistics are all important, a lot of times these things don't get reported because they just are going to fire Nick or they're going to fire Jim and get rid of the problem. They
it's
never go to
embarrassing. Yeah,
court. Yeah, so what can that also do? Your stock price can drop if you report it. So these are the ones that we see a lot in the news and reports of the stuff that's been reported. How many are not reported? I would say probably a fair amount. I think people sometimes will be like, oh, it's only 30%. Well, that's 30% of some report. What's it in your company?
yeah, agreed. Agreed. And it may even not be something that's at a executive level. It might have just been within a department where the department knew
Right.
that something got like this, and they don't want to tell because they don't want to get in trouble. And it can happen. So let's do this. I want to get a little more tactical. And so for you guys in the audience, I put up, again, using my sort of leading indicators and active indicators, not an official, kind of standard, but I wanted to sort of differentiate. And I want to kind of walk these a little bit with you. And Jim, I got a couple questions I was thinking about asking, but for you guys in the audience, the leading, you look at things that are both technical that you might be looking for, as well as non-technical. In a lot of cases, the answer isn't just looking at, for example, looking in their email and seeing what's happening. It might actually be like the second bullet on the left-hand side here, HR issues. HR is a great source of information and intelligence for IT and security teams to figure out where they need to be focusing their energies. Because if you find out that someone got reprimanded, or someone's having an issue, or they told HR that they now have their wife now has cancer, and they've spent their entire life savings trying to get her cancer treatment, or something, whatever it is, you start going, maybe that person might become a risk to the organization. I mentioned things like leaving times. I've talked about the tone of their communications. Even things like maybe they're looking for a new job on the web. That is potential there for a risk. And then, of course, the active side, these are high level, but there's still the tactical things that you might want to be looking at: logging on, logging off, what applications are using, when they're using them, how long they're using them, if they're excessively using them, excessive printing, are they accessing data maybe more often than they normally do, or if they're accessing it at all, and what are they doing with it? Are they copying it? Are they printing it? Are they putting it? You mentioned a USB stick, Jim. And again, I put communications on both sides, because communications isn't just email, it's chat. It's even if they're on Facebook Messenger, in a web browser, I mean, anything, any way they're talking to someone, because those can also help provide context around what's going on. So for example, if someone is actively stealing data from your organization and they happen to have a Skype window open, and you were somehow able to watch the Skype window and pull that data out, then you can see that they're talking to someone and saying, I almost have all the information. No one's even any the wiser. These people are so stupid. Now they're definitely doing something bad, and that helps provide context. So these are some really good threat indicators. So Jim, the thing I'd ask you to kind of maybe augment this, or what are some of the other leading indicators that you think that an insider may demonstrate that may become a threat eventually, that I've left off the list here? So on the left-hand side, what else is missing?
I look at it as, there's, of course, the technical indicators you mentioned, but then I work with one company and we defined it in 3 ways. Employee threat, looking at it as building the nuggets. The more nuggets you have about somebody, the more you know. And the fact that somebody's just using Skype, that may legitimately be for a meeting, right? Okay, they're not uploading anything. But if you take the fact that they're using Skype, they're transferring data out, but then you look at, let's say, the indicators of they're on a reduction in force list. It's gone around and the company may be acquired or merged with another company. Maybe they're sending out their resume. I call these just the low-hanging ones. The supervisor's treating some employees really bad, so they're disgruntled. So when you take these higher level, what I call employee threat indicators, and then you sort of couple them with disgruntled indicators, which could be they're unhappy, they didn't get the benefit of the, the bonus, they didn't get the promotion, they're not recognized for their achievements, lack of training, so they're not being promoted. So, you know, you take that next group and then you go down and you look at the behavioral indicators, like some of the things you mentioned. What are they doing on the network? When are they coming and going? Their hours of operation. You know, you may have the person who's sitting in the cubicle saying nasty things, and the cubicle mate hears it, says something to HR, and HR dives into it and talks to all the different departments, and you come out to find that it's not just somebody that's unhappy that he didn't get his promotion. He's burning stuff through his USB stick. He's printing. He's coming in from 9 to 12 every Sunday. So when you take all these various indicators, you start to come up with that whole picture, rather than just a guy sitting in his cubicle, upset and running his mouth on the phone, you know, to the husband or wife that they're upset that they didn't get the promotion. Does that make sense there, Nick? You know, you tie it all together.
No, that makes perfect sense, and that's actually really good. That's a good point for you guys in the audience, that it isn't just as simple as looking at technical things that they do, technical activities they do on a machine. It can be, there's a lot of other sources of data that you can use, and that's going to kind of lead us over to our next slide in a moment here. But before we get to that slide, talk about the kinds of solutions you might use in order to figure out whether you've got a potential threat or an active threat that's occurring. Jim, let me kind of ask the same question, but for sort of what I'm calling the active indicator, something where a threat is happening right now. What are some other indicators of someone who's actively committing a threat action of some kind? What are some other things you tell the audience to look for?
You mean indicators? I mean, as far as
yeah, like in some other types of activities, like, you know, I've talked about excessive printing or copying data to USB stick or things like that would indicate there's a threat that might be occurring right now. What other kinds of activities might you tell your customers or the audience here that they should be looking for?
Well, I mean, if you go, you know, you can go down to the other indicators. Your, you know, person coming to work intoxicated, people that have, you know, these are not necessarily technical, financial problems, and they may be stealing your data for a reason. Maybe there's some criminal activity, something happened, now they got to pay for their lawyer, so they're going to have to steal from the company, even though it's like a double-edged sword, but they need the money. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones.
No, those are fine. I was actually asking more about when someone is actively right now doing something bad against the company. It's actively happening. So not the leading indicators. What are some of the other active things they would be looking for, like they're using the applications, you know, that they shouldn't be accessing sensitive data they normally do? What are some of those other types of activities that demonstrate someone is doing something right now? I mean, they're doing it.
You could have, let's see here, some of the ones you could have, virtual machine activity, you know, people running virtual machines within the host operating system to hide what they're doing. Like, okay, well, I'm going to install this virtual machine within the regular operating system, and hopefully they won't catch me exfiltrating the data. I've seen people downloading web browser extensions and sharing their screen. As silly as it may sound, one organization, the employee was actually stealing the data, but not physically. They were just sharing the screen all day with another company by simply putting a browser extension in Chrome, downloading tools that don't need to be installed. For example, downloading a tool to hide documents within a picture, stenography, right? And exfiltrating the data that way. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. Cloud access, remote access, people running remote access tools on their computers so that they can come back in after hours and get data. One of my students, when I was actually talking about this, said we were walking the guy out the door and letting him go. When the IT department went back to the computer, found out that he had a remote access tool running, so he could come back in after he was fired and steal the data. I mean, there's so many of them.
Backdoor accounts come to mind as well. Yeah, that would be something else I would think of, especially if they're in IT and can do that.
Printing email.
The list goes on.
Yeah.
No, that's good. So I wanted to try to give you guys in the audience, and Jim, those were very helpful, because I want you guys to kind of expand your horizon here and think about all the different ways, as ludicrous as it sounds. Like the sharing of the screen, I'd never heard that. My jaw dropped a little bit when you said that, but then I went, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Because I've heard stories where people have opened up health records in a hospital and just took pictures, and then went to the next record, took pictures, went to the next record, took pictures, that kind of thing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be on the device itself. In this case, that's preposterous, man. That's just wow. I'm shocked.
Nick,
So
you have to. The one thing I encourage everybody is you have to think outside the box. You have to think outside the box of compliance regulations for one simple reason. Malicious insiders and just insiders who are doing stuff unwittingly, they don't care about all your compliance regulations and all that stuff. They're just doing it because they can, or because they want to achieve an objective. Let's say a malicious insider. So they don't. They're hoping you only go by compliance regulations. Because my point is, if you don't think outside the box and do a little better than what a compliance regulation says, you're going to get hurt. I mean, I've actually demonstrated to companies when I've gone out, and they're like, "Oh, that can't happen here," and then I prove it to them. And I'm like, "Well, you only went by compliance regulations."
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. If you're just going to simply stick with it's like saying, let's make killing people even more illegal. That means people will kill less. No, you're just sticking with the law. You have to go kind of figure out what they're doing that's different. I love that thinking. That makes perfect sense. So let's do this. Let's go and talk about give our audience some sort of light at the end of the tunnel here. So we've kind of, I think, explained enough that it's difficult. We've talked about some ways, the kinds of things you need to be looking for. And what I want to do is I wanted to kind of list out at least a couple of different kinds of solutions that are here. Even though this is sponsored by Veriato, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of other ones as well, because the goal here for each one of you is a little bit different. Not every solution is there that's going to be tailored to meet exactly your needs. It depends on what you want to do, depends on the budget you have, depends on the skills level you have, and so on. So it sort of makes it a little bit different here. But I've got a number of different solutions here. I'm going to kind of list these here and put these up here for you guys. You got like data loss prevention is one way. That's one way of finding out that someone is trying to exfiltrate data from the organization, whether they're trying to copy that through a web browser potentially, or if they're trying to do it through email, those kinds of things you can maybe find out. There's event auditing at sort of a basic level. That's sort of, I'm thinking along those lines, is like just using like Windows auditing and maybe have a couple of alerts set up for specific types of activities, those kinds of things. That tends to be a little bit long in the tooth because it's a lot of information, not a lot of insight, not a lot of intelligence, but just a lot of information. And then you've got a SIM solution where you're corroborating different types of data together to figure out that someone is doing something bad. So for example, you might pull some HR data in, you might pull some logon information in, file access data, web access data, and so on. And you're looking at all of that and looking for indicators. And there's a number of vendors that have actually figured out ways to create the filters automatically. From a SIM standpoint, you've got user behavior analytics. This is a kind of solution where it's watching for those leading indicators, looking at the things I mentioned, the changes in behavior, the changes in communication, and notifying you of a leading indicator of a threat. And then you've got user activity monitoring. And that's more where you're recording what the user is doing, watching all the activity that they perform, and then being able to alert, report, and potentially, depending on the solution that's made by, review and replay the activity itself. So, Jim, let me do this. Where do you think the audience should start? I'm thinking it's closer to what the business objective is for the organization, and then work towards the technology rather than just picking a tech, which is sort of what I outlined here. But would you agree? Should they start with that?
Good point. Yes, I say that's a problem that I see, Nick, and that's a very, very good point, is that people just run out and buy a tool. They don't really understand what they're buying, and then it's too hard to set up, too much data. They never really define what they were trying to get from the tool, right? So approaching it from your perspective is right. So what are we trying to do here? If we're simply trying to do here, let's say company XYZ, and they decide we just want to watch what people are doing for USBs, printings, what they're surfing on the web, basic activity, it's going to give them a lot of information. A user activity monitoring tool would be great. Okay, let's go up to the next level. We're going to go with a user activity monitoring tool that has behavior analytics, because we want to compare what Nick and Jim are doing. Oh, Nick and Jim both work in finance, but Jim is doing more than Nick. That's a step up above user activity monitoring. Then we can even go farther in that and get into what I call the more advanced behavioral analytics tools, where you can pull in badge data, you can pull in human resources data, you can pull in SIM data, you can pull in so much data you're going to be overwhelmed. So your point, Nick, is what do you as a company want to see about your employees? Does that make sense how I explained it?
Yeah, no, it does, yeah.
You really have, it's almost going back to defining what insider threat is concerned to your company. So when you're looking at a tool, just don't go buy a tool because your friend at XYZ company, your company may be 1,000 people and your buddy's company may be 10,000. Well, maybe that product that they selected over there was great for 10,000, but you're only 1,000. It may be overkill for what you have. So, that's the way I look at it, when it comes down to the tools, is you've got to define what you're trying to detect, observe.
I would agree. I think there's a balance for you guys in the audience where if you're doing this properly, you've got some kind of insider risk team that you're pulling together, which includes the executive team, legal, HR, a security team, IT. I'm assuming you have all those different, kind of roles in your organization, and if not, someone that represents them. And you talk about what you're trying to accomplish. But in that mix is exactly what Jim's talking about, which is this: what do you want to detect? Because some of that is going to be, well, like, I don't know, what can I detect? Right, exactly. So you do have to bring the solution into the mix and then kind of figure out, does that meet our needs and our objectives overall? Like, we're trying to watch for, let's say, fraud. I'm making this up as I go along. And we're trying to watch for, I'm going to go back to one of your earlier examples, Jim, bullying. Just go with it if you guys in the audience. And you're looking, those are the two things your company is really concerned about. Okay, so then at least now what should we be looking at? Well, let's see, bullying, probably the way they communicate with each other, so probably email. Okay, so you need something that does email. And you start to build a checklist of technically what you need to do that's going to meet your business objective. And then you have to bring in the solutions into play to figure out, one, can they do what you're trying to do, but also figure out, can they make what you think you want to do even better? Because typically they're going to have a lot more functionality than just what you're looking for. So, Jim, this is what I want to do, though. I listed a couple solutions up here, and I'm sure I maybe even missed some possibly, but would you maybe, if you want to augment this list, feel free to do so. But could you kind of walk through these and maybe pros and cons from a vendor neutral standpoint of where they're going to find value, where they're not going to find value? And you have to go through each one and do pros and cons each, but just something along those lines of where they're going to get the most bang for the buck if they're going to have to go and purchase some kind of solution.
Well, okay. So for a DLP, I mean, you're talking about, for a DLP, you have various solutions out there. DLP tools can block, where, you, Nick, as the employee, go to send something out, and a little box comes up and either says allow or stop, or maybe it allows and you don't know it, it quarantines it. So, the problem is now some of these tools, I've seen some of the user activity monitoring tools might have a little bit DLP. What I'm seeing over the years is a lot of these tools that were just, you had A, B, C, and D, the features are starting to morph. This tool was only this, now it's a little bit of this. So you've got the DLP tool, which of course is more for the blocking, monitor control, endpoint activities, and you can filter what's going out of the network. You've got the user activity monitoring tools you talked about, which are looking at all the different content, whether it's print, email, USBs, web surfing. Then we talked about user activity monitoring tools. User behavioral analytics tools, which compare. Your question was asking, Nick, I'm sorry again, was?
Just sort of pros and cons of each, and you're doing a fine job. I think it's just to provide your perspective around for the audience, where you think the benefits are of any of them.
I don't want to see a company have to spend money twice, right? I go back to one, what are you trying to detect and observe? And say to yourself, okay, let's look at the solutions. And also consider, though, even though you may have 10 people or 5 people sitting around the table, and 4 of them are going, well, I want to go with that tool. It provides more. The more data comes in sometimes, you may actually need a full-time person sitting behind that tool. If you go with a user activity monitoring tool where it's alerting on specific actions, it's still going to be a very useful tool. It's going to give you insight into insight you never had. Where when you start stepping it up, and I hate to use the word the Chevy or going up to the Cadillac, but as you start to step up in capabilities, you might start to step up in cost, possibly. You might start to step up in the support people needed. For example, you might just be able to plug in a user activity monitoring tool, which I've done for companies, and boom, wow, look at all this stuff popping up. Then you go up to another tool, you might have to configure certain settings and things, tweak it to what you want. That takes time, that takes manpower, that takes money. SIM tools are great. They pull in the logs, but you can be pulling in a lot of event logs. And I sometimes don't know that it's going to give you as clear as a picture as the user activity monitoring tool. Now, some of the user activity monitoring tools, and I will say that I know Veriato you can actually, I think, pull in, event logs, from SIM tools.
So I'm kind of in the same kind of line of thinking that you've gone back to user activity monitor a couple times, and for you guys in the audience, one of the challenges I find with insider threats is that you need to be watching the insider. That's the bottom line, and you're trying to get as close to them as you possibly can. And so, full disclosure, I'm a big fan of UAM. I love user activity monitoring. I think that's a great idea because if it's done right, you're sitting and you got some kind of agent-based solution that's sitting at the intersection of the user and everything they do and everything they interact with. Versus one of the downsides I see with like a SIM solution, for example, is that if I'm going to pull in, let's just say file auditing data from a Windows server. Just go with it. Let's suppose that's the only place that your sensitive data exists on. It will pull that data in, and a good SIM that exists, and there's a number of them out there today that do this, where they're going to translate sort of that information, all that raw data that comes in, into some kind of intelligence. So rather than you having to go through all these different logs yourself, they'll just tell you, Bob copied a file from here to here. Okay, cool. At least they did that for me. I'd have to look at 17 logs to figure that out on my own.
You don't have to glue all the nuggets together. You're right.
No, exactly. But the downside of the SIM is that it's only as good as the data inputs that it gets. So for the example, sticking with that example of a Windows audit log, yes, it will know that Bob went and accessed some data up on the intellectual property folder. Go with it for the example. But the SIM solution won't know what he did with it. The SIM solution doesn't know that he went and copied it as an attachment or saved it on his local drive and copied it to USB or put it on an attachment onto some kind of webmail and sent it out, or even just sent it as a file attached to like a Skype conversation. The SIM solution doesn't know those things. So I'm a big fan of UAM because it's very, very close to the user as much as possible. I mean, Jim, your thoughts on that benefit to using that kind of a solution?
I am more favorable towards UAM. I liked all the tools, very familiar with them. I like what your point was about the event logs. I work for one organization. Doesn't matter whether government or whether it's private sector, and they were pretty much, focused on strictly event logs. And I said, okay, that's great. You're going to see what you talked about there. Something going into somebody doing something in a folder they weren't supposed to. I said, well, what happens when, for example, Bob decides to turn on the hotspot on his phone and steal data off the laptop? Well, they're not supposed to. I said,
right.
They're not supposed to. That
That's
laptop has, well, I said, that laptop has wireless on it. So Jim turns on the hotspot on his phone, and then connects the laptop, but it's turned off in the BIOS. You don't think people can get back into the BIOS. All right, so follow me here. So
Yep.
maybe maybe the BIOS is not locked down. Regardless, maybe policy says they're not supposed to use wireless, but they do, and they turn on the hotspot, and out goes through all the files through Comcast or Gmail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's checking the laptop to see that it was connected to the internet. Oops. So
Yep.
I'll
give you one better than that. I'll give you one better than that. And this is something I actually did. This is years ago. I was writing a blog about this, and I don't even know if it even exists anymore. It's been many years. But I was demonstrating just stealing data with Bluetooth. And the concept was, at the time, my office was on the external wall of the building, and there's a parking lot right next to the building. So that means someone could sit in a car. On my laptop, I could connect to their Bluetooth device that's some kind of storage device, because it's within the 50 feet line of sight kind of thing, because I was right there. And I actually demonstrated with a couple screenshots. I just simply connected to, I forget what it was. Maybe it was like the storage on my phone or something to make the point. But I made the connection. I copied the file over, and then I deleted the Bluetooth connection. There's no trace of it. It's not on any system that would ever be recorded, and there's no trace that I ever did anything ever. There's not like a cookie for it, or nothing. It's just gone. Poof, I did it. But if you've got something watching the endpoint, then you're able to catch even those kind of maniacal, sort of strange things that no one would ever think of happening, by watching that. But there are some values that think. Good. I'll make my.
No, I was just going to add, Nick, that you made me think of something. With these UAM tools, some will argue a UAM tool is too basic. I'm like, yeah, but a UAM tool, you can have a dirty word list, and you can put in there words like stenography, words that are related to like network security things that a person might be searching for, and when they go to that website to download it, boom, you get a hit. Yeah. I mean, I've actually, again, gone into companies where they've had more advanced tools, and they're like, how did you get that data out? I'm like, simple techniques that if you were watching me correctly, you should have caught me. But, of course they knew I was doing this. It was part of an exercise. But, I think some people tend to downplay sometimes UAM tools. UAM tools have great value because they give you that snapshot of what people are doing.
Indeed. So let's do this. We got 9 minutes left, and now we got a couple questions in the Q&A box there. I want to make sure we have time for those. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to sum this up real quick, and then Jim, maybe if you got a brief closing thoughts, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. And then let's go and take the questions that we have. Run ourselves right up to the top of the hour. So the insider here, I've already kind of outlined. I think Jim and I both made the point. It's not the easiest target to spot. The question here is, who are they working for? They're working for themselves or for your organization? Are they doing their job or not? What's actually going on there? You do have to define what an insider means to your organization and what an insider threat means to your organization first. Again, you want to start with the business. You've got to decide what indicators are appropriate for the things that you're trying to detect, and then you're going to eventually go to the technology that does the monitoring, the alerting, the reviewing, the whatever it is that you want to do as part of the incident response process that you put in place. So, Jim, final thoughts before we do Q&A?
No, just define what your insider threat is and gather the nuggets and happy hunting.
Happy hunting. Excellent. So this, of course, just before we do the Q&A, this was brought to you by Veriato. They're our sponsor today. There's two solutions they've got here. Veriato Recon, that's a user behavior analytics solution. That's the one that's going to be looking for leading indicators using shifts in behavior, shifts in communication. And then you got Veriato 360. User activity monitoring, that's more for incident response and investigation. This is where you've got high levels of visibility into basically everything that an employee does. When I talk about these kinds of solutions, and this applies to Veriato 360, I tell people to think of it as sort of a keylogger on steroids. It's recording everything that the employee does, every keystroke, every email, every Word document they open, everything they copy, every web page, everything. And then you can replay it like a video, plus you can search through all the data and do keyword analysis, alerting, reporting, and so on and so forth. So very powerful solutions. I'm going to leave these up here. You guys can always go to veriato.com and look at those. A couple of the questions that have come in, Jim, real quick. And if you have any other questions while I'm reading these, by all means, stick those in the Q&A box, because we've got a couple of minutes. Looks like we've got still 6 minutes till the top of the hour. So Jim, one of our audience members says, I have no budget for a third-party solution. Where should I start?
Well, they said they have a budget or have no budget.
Have no budget for a third-party solution. What can they do for free? Let's start there, because there's some people in this audience that can't do it. So where should they start for free? I'm thinking at least Windows event logs and do something. Maybe try and find a free event log consolidation solution or something nominal price. What would you suggest?
Talk to your IT. Talk to your IT department if you have one. What can they provide you? What can they provide you? Go to them and say, can you tell me what people are web surfing? Can you tell me what people are doing printing? Which can tell me this? I had one student in the class when we talked about monitoring. He was an IT guy, and he goes, Jim, everything that you're talking about, the tools, I can do that. A lot of companies can do it in-house if they have the manpower. So see what your IT department has, if they have an IT department. As far as free tools out there, I don't really know of that many free tools in UAM.
No, I don't think they're going to find many there, but at least you guys can start with trying to collect any and all data that you can. For example, logging on and logging off. You get that out of Windows event logs. I would do that.
Right.
I'd be looking at file activity. You can do that. You can probably, if you have any kind of firewall that's got logs, maybe you can do some kind of event consolidation type of solution where at least you can consolidate logs for where people are visiting on the web. Get some kinds of indicators. Do something. I think the point here is don't just do nothing because you have a tool. Do something. Ideally, you need something that's going to turn information into intelligence and intelligence into insights. You can actually act on it, but do something. So the next question is, they say we're focusing on spotting fraud and data theft specifically. Which activity data should we collect and monitor? What's your thoughts on that, Jim?
For fraud?
Yeah, fraud and then data theft specifically.
Well, data theft, it's really, what are they trying to take out documents? Are they in your databases exporting stuff? I really think it depends specifically on the organization, where the data resides, what format it's in. Is, like I said, again, is in a database. And then from a fraud perspective, that's a tough one. A lot of times I see fraud cases, they're very sophisticated. These people have worked in these departments for a long time. They know how these departments operate, and they find a way to, some of these fraud schemes have gone on 5 and 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because they know better than anyone else how the department operates, and they can cite some stuff off or come up with some scheme. So, it starts, though, watching the people at a minimum. What are they doing?
Yeah, I would agree. Fraud is very difficult. The ACFE, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, has a great report. The report to the nations comes out every year, and the numbers don't change a whole lot every year. But it's months and months and months to be detected, especially because it goes longer as the people have been there longer, because you're just assuming that Sally's been here forever. She's not going to do anything. I remember reading a story about a woman who had been issuing herself fraudulent paychecks. And it was something like 9 years, and the only reason she got caught was she had issued a paycheck to someone's name, and the teller at the bank knew someone with that name. I don't even know if it was a real person that she was trying to make. It could have been Sally Fields, and just, that's who the check was written to or whatever. And they know Sally Fields, and you're not Sally Fields, and that's how she got busted. It's the only reason she got busted. It was years into this whole thing, so ridiculous. So let's do this. So one last question here, and then we're going to wrap things up because we've got 2 more minutes till the top of the hour. Last question here is, would you lay out 4 or 5 high-level steps to setting up an insider threat program?
Okay, one, I'd start with getting your stakeholders together. The people in, whether it's the CEO, human resources, if you have a legal department, your IT department, your security department, breaking down the silos and all working together. That's one step. Really, that step can help with the program. A lot of companies, you have the program, it's either assigned to a new person, you're hiring brand new as a program manager, or you're assigning it to an existing security person. So, you could call that, those are sort of steps 1 and 2. The stakeholders I talk about is your working group. Getting those people together, define what you're trying to do. From there, looking at what your IT department can do internally before you go and buy a tool. Trying to think of some of the other steps. Looking at your existing culture of your organization. Do you have good security culture? Building on that. What I see far too many companies doing is just putting an insider threat program over an organization with a very weak security culture is going to fix things. It's not. It's just like, plopping a Band-Aid on something before you fix the original problem. But so much of this starts with communication, breaking down the silos, breaking down the disbelief, departments not wanting to share. A lot of this is, I say it's simple, it should be, but once you get everybody start working together, sometimes this is where the issues come, is other people that really aren't experts, they don't understand insider threat, start coming up with, we can't do this, HR can't share this, we can't do this, and then before you know it, the program that should have taken 6 months has taken a year. I've actually seen that. So
yeah,
get everybody working together.
Yeah, agreed. Just on that note, since you're asking about 4 or 5 steps, this is slightly different, but it's actually very related to your question, and for anyone else that's interested. So this happens to be 8 steps, but I just recently wrote a white paper for Veriato, so you have to find this on their website. I don't have a link to it. This wasn't prepared, but it's called Getting Started, 8 Steps to Implementing a User Activity and Behavior Monitoring Program. So, and there's 8 steps kind of outlined there, and it sort of aligns with, if you're trying to come up with some of an insider threat program or an insider risk program, whatever term you want to call it, it's certainly very centric to what Veriato does, but that might be of help as well. So looks like we're at the top of the hour. So Jim, let me kind of finish things off by thanking you for your participation today. Some really great information you shared. So thank you very much. Did I lose you, Jim? You still there? Okay, good. Making sure you're still there. Very good.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
It was. And you guys in the audience, thanks for your questions. Thank you for your attention. We hope that today was informative, that you learned something for sure. I'm guessing that you did, because you guys stayed on to the bitter end here. And with that, we will catch you guys on the next webcast. And this concludes today's webcast. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.